callers today. And I don't know where this is going to go. I'm happy for this conversation to go wherever it goes. It's like a dance, and I'm happy to follow your lead in this dance. So thank you for making the time for me early in the year.
Oh, well, Gregg, I don't know what to say. All I can say is I am delighted and honored because having worked with you a few times now, I have seen your international travel schedule, and I know that it is ridiculously hectic. So I am just delighted that you could also find a space for me in your very busy schedule.
Well, are we busy? Yes. Are we too busy for friends? Absolutely not. So thank you, and I'll just say right now, I'll say welcome to everyone that's listening, and thank you for, let's see, what time is it in your world right now?
It's 8:37 p.m., so we're just heading into our evening.
That's what I'm thinking. So I want to thank everyone for taking a few moments out of your evening to join us. So I'm going to follow your lead, Marilyn, and we can roll whenever you're ready to roll.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to start with your introduction, and then we're going to go from there. So thank you to everyone who is joining us live, and also to everyone who will be listening to this as a replay recording. My name is Marilyn Devonish from transformationstm.com, and I'm a coach and trainer and management consultant. And one of the things that I am passionate about is sharing and disseminating wonderful information. So the guest I have today for the first of the In Conversation series for this year is the incredible Gregg Braden. And for those of you who have not yet come across Gregg, Gregg is a 5-time New York Times best-selling author. He's an educator, lecturer, researcher, and is internationally renowned as a pioneer for bridging modern science, ancient wisdom, and human potential. And just to give you a little bit of background in terms of some of the things that Gregg has done in his work and career, from 1979 to 1990, Gregg worked as a problem solver during times of crisis for Fortune 500 companies, including Cisco Systems, who I worked very closely with in the late 90s, actually, and Martin Marietta Aerospace. And he continues to problem solve today as he looks at the whole synergy between modern science and modern wisdom. His research has led him to write 12 award-winning books, which have now been published in over 40 different languages, and he has presented his discoveries in over 30 countries on 6 continents, and has also been invited to speak at the United Nations, the U.S. military, and for those of us in the UK, Watkins Journal also lists Gregg among the top 100 of the world's most spiritually influential people for the 5th consecutive year, and he is a 2018 nominee for the prestigious Templeton Award, which was established to honor outstanding individuals who have devoted their talents to expanding our vision of human purpose and ultimate reality. So that's a bit about the incredible gentleman we are going to hear from today. And I think for me, one of the driving forces for inviting Gregg was I've been lucky enough to, have dinner with Gregg at speaking events and just kind of spending time talking. We've had the most incredible conversations. And there have been times where I was thinking, oh my God, my friends, my clients, my contacts would love to hear some of this. And so what I wanted to do was to give you an opportunity to be into and party to that conversation. So Gregg, hello and welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you again so very much, and thank you for honoring me with a beautiful introduction. I'm listening to my life on the other end of the phone, and some of those things seem like a lifetime ago, but it all works so that we can honor ourselves and honor where we are in the world today, in this convergence of extremes that we're all finding ourselves in. So I'm looking forward to are we going to take live calls, or are we going to take written, emailed questions, or
we are taking
or both?
So I've got we're going to be doing written email questions. So I've got a few questions that people have sent in already, and we'll have some coming in via the chat as well.
Awesome,
and Gregg,
beautiful.
Round is around your new book, Human by Design, which I have to say is an absolutely beautiful and fascinating and riveting read. So before we get into some of the specifics of the book, is there anything that you would like to start by saying about this book and about some of the things that you have covered and talked about and researched for this particular sort of volume.
Sure, thank you, Marilyn. The book Human by Design is released in 2017, and it has been very well received in many different languages throughout the world. It is essentially two books woven into a single book. The first half of the book describes the science, the new discoveries, Marilyn. So they're not necessarily my opinions or my theories or my hypotheses, but this is the rock-solid science telling us that evolution, as we have been led to believe, is not the human story. The new discoveries that are not making it into, they're simply not trickling down into the mainstream classrooms, textbooks. You're not seeing these discoveries in mainstream cable television news on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are relegated to these obscure technical journals where the science is being shared. It simply is not being shared among the mainstream. The second part of the book goes beyond the discoveries. So the discoveries tell us why we are literally wired for extraordinary potentials, extraordinary capabilities that we have believed are beyond our reach in the past. So the second part of the book, I wanted to actually give the instructions. How do we awaken these extraordinary potentials of deep intuition and the self-regulation of our biology? How do we self-regulate longevity, for example, the enzymes in our bodies that want to help to make us younger and help to create the healing at the cellular level? How do we regulate our immune response? How do we create resilience in a world that's changing faster than we can track it in our textbooks and classrooms? So the second part of the book, I was writing as if I would never physically meet my readers and yet wanted to honor them with as much concrete data and applicable techniques as I could possibly do. And so that's the essence of the book. The book, I feel, is important, Marilyn, because our world is globalizing. And as we globalize and push together cultures and religions and beliefs, the way that men think about women, the way women think about men, all of these different things, as we push together human cultures, and we see the atrocities, and we see the hurt, and we see the hate, and we see the violence that is resulting from this globalization, it's all possible only because of the way we've been taught to think. And while we can pass laws that make hate illegal, to truly change the hurt and the hate that stems from that hurt, we've got to go to the core, to the root of the problem, and it's all based on the way we've been taught to think. And we have been taught to believe that nature is based upon competition, conflict, struggle, and that we are the product of a random process of genetic mutations. And the bottom line is the evidence simply does not support that belief. So as we embrace the new discoveries, they give us a reason to think differently about ourselves. And I think ultimately these are the reasons that will lead to the end of hate as we begin to embrace the deepest truths of our existence. So for those listeners that have not read the book, I've just encapsulated a little bit what it is and why I think it's important in our lives today.
And Greg, I think one of the things I loved about the book, because I think, sometimes people say that they just call me Miss Practicality, where I can take sometimes quite complex ideas and break them down and hand them back to people in a way that they can actually apply them. And one of the things I loved about the book was, as you were saying, there are the processes that people can actually take themselves through to put all of this into practice. And I absolutely love that about it. So in terms of actually one of the questions, because it is in alignment with what you were kind of talking about there, so I'm just going to kind of pull this one up, and we're going to kick off with this one, and then we will see where we go from there. So somebody was asking about the fact, and they called it the holographic kind of universe, and the way that we interact with the world and the universe. So I'm going to sort of just kind of start partway through. So this is from Melanie. One of the things she says is, the only, so she talks about you talking about the hologram, the holographic universe. She said the only hologram that I can reference is that of Princess Leia in Star Wars, which Gregg has referenced himself. But she said, regardless of how many times I've read or heard Gregg explain it, I have to sort my mind around the concepts, and I cannot grasp a visual image or understanding on the universe being a hologram and how it relates to us and our interaction with the universe. So she was asking if there was another way that you could talk about us, our connection, and the universe, and how we all interact in this world.
So we'll start with the easy questions first. So,
well, yeah.
I mean, this could be the whole topic of our entire hour together here, and in the interest of being brief and concise, there's an example that I often give, and I believe I give it in this book, about the holographic principle. Holograms mean different things to different people. The Princess Leia hologram was a projection, and that is one aspect, one facet of what is possible in a hologram. So let me just kind of back off and offer another example. In the 1980s, when the New Thought movement was really coming into vogue, there were in the New Age bookstores, and I know that they were in London because I was in London seeing these, there were bookmarks that were created based upon kind of New Age concepts of, and they were three-dimensional holographic bookmarks. So one of them I remember was a dolphin jumping over the Great Pyramid in Giza, and there was another one, beautiful three-dimensional image of Mother Mary. There was another one of a rose that would look like it was unfolding. And when you hold these bookmarks in your hand, because they are holographic, they look as if they were hovering in the air above your hand, if they're truly holograms. So you would hold them in the light, and they would become very three-dimensional, very real, very lifelike. So in a true hologram, here's the key. In a true hologram, the entire image is contained in every part of the image. So what that means is if you had one of those beautiful bookmarks and you wanted to prove this concept, you could take a pair of scissors and you could cut that bookmark into 1,000,000 pieces, and then you could take the smallest one of those pieces and you could cut it in half even one more time, and when you put it under a magnifier, you would see the entire image still portrayed within that fragment. And this is a beautiful example of why a hologram is so important, because every piece is mirrored in the whole. Poets have spoken, William Blake talks about this, seeing the world in a grain of sand, because that grain of sand is a hologram of the world around us. This principle is so powerful because what it says to us is if the whole is reflected and contained in every fraction, it means that change in a holographic system comes about much easier than we would typically think. And I'll give you a perfect example of this, the human body. The scientists say that the average human body has about 50 trillion cells in the body. Well, our body is holographic in nature. The information of our DNA, the information of our cells is holographic, and you can prove this to yourself because when you have a shot, for example, if you have a vaccine, and I'm not saying vaccines are good, bad, right, or wrong. There's a whole conversation about what they are and how they're used. But in a vaccine, if each cell were being inoculated one cell at a time, and it took 1 second per cell, it would take 50 trillion seconds for that vaccine to work, and we know it doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't is because of the holographic nature of cells and DNA. Once the information is introduced into one part of the body, into one cell or one strand of DNA, it is mirrored throughout the system, and that's why we can actually heal very, very quickly. So the holographic principle, the beauty of the holographic principle is that the change made in one place is reflected everywhere to some degree. And when it comes to human populations, the science shows us this is all true as well. When we want to bring about change in society, or we want to bring about change in our community, we don't have to go one door to the next door to the next door to the next door of our neighbors to bring about that change. When new ideas and new concepts are introduced, what we will find is when they're meaningful to people, they will be embraced and reflected very quickly. Some people call this the 100th monkey principle, but it is actually based in the idea of the holographic principle. So what scientists tell us now is the universe is holographic, that our bodies are holographic, and that information is holographic. So for us, without getting into the details of the science, what it means is if we can anchor a concept, anchor a new way of thinking, if we can anchor it firmly within ourselves, and we can anchor that within our families, it is reflected, and you begin to see those changes in the people around us, in the workplace and in the school, without having to convince or persuade anyone of anything. And this is what the hologram is all about. Many people are familiar with the 100th monkey language, but they may not actually know what it represents. There was a study that was done, I believe it was in the late 19th century, and there were monkeys on a single island. They were isolated from any populations of any other monkeys. And the scientists that were observing them noticed that the climate had changed, the weather had changed, and the food sources had changed as well, and the monkeys had to adapt. And what they did was they found that there were large ant hills, and the monkeys were using the ants for food, but they couldn't get them out of the ground, and so one monkey had the idea to take a stick, take all the branches off of a tree limb, and take that tree limb and put it into the ground, and the ants would cling to that, and then he would pull it out of the ground, and he would have a meal. And almost instantaneously, monkeys on other islands that had no physical communication began to adapt to the same principle, and they'd never been observed doing this in the past. And the mystery is, how did this happen? And it evolved into what's called the 100 monkey principle. But what we now know is it's the holographic principle that made this happen. Once the idea was anchored into the consciousness of that one family, the one society of monkeys on one island, it was everywhere simultaneously. So it's a long answer to a short question, and I try to do it in a couple of different ways. And we can go into it in more detail, but do you feel like that addresses the question, Marilyn? Did we
absolutely.
Did we get close?
That is lovely analogies, and one of the things that I'm thinking as you're talking, because I know one of the conversations around this book is what would happen if this was being taught in schools and added to the textbooks as a new way of thinking, and I know you even talked about some of the legislation that was passed to almost stop that happening. So I'm now thinking, well, what needs to happen to anchor the ideas that you are putting forward in your book, and you and others who are in this field, what needs to happen to anchor those into consciousness?
Well, it's actually already happening, and I'll give you a perfect example. In the year 2007, I released a book in the U.S. and the U.K. simultaneously. It was called The Divine Matrix. And it was a very healing book for me to write because it was an opportunity for me to coalesce into one place the science that has confirmed that we are indeed connected through a field of energy, a mysterious field of subtle energy that exists everywhere, all the time, and apparently has been with us from the very beginning, that the physicist Max Planck, early in the 20th century, actually called the Matrix. And the movie, The Matrix, was based upon the ideas of Max Planck, that there is a world that exists that we cannot see from our vantage point. On the one hand, yet that world influences tremendously what happens in the world that we can see. So this is an opportunity for me to write this book. It was considered fringe science, F-R-I-N-G-E. Some people call it pseudo-science. And I remember I went to my hometown in the state of Missouri here in the United States to do a book signing with Barnes & Noble bookstore. And I walked into the bookstore to do my book signing, and I said, I expected to see the book on a shelf somewhere prominent. And I looked around, and there was no book. And I said, where's the book? And they said, oh, your book is in the back of the bookstore on the shelf that is called occult. It was considered occult information in 2007. So what happened was the ideas in the book spoke so deeply to what we already sense is true in our hearts. We universally have a sense that things are connected and we're part of something greater. It's just that idea is not reinforced in our science, in our textbooks. We're taught that everything is separate. So that book touched so many people between 2007 and 2017. So in 10 years, the book went from being considered fringe science on the occult bookshelves to now considered being mainstream science. The book is now required reading in university physics classes. A made-for-television movie has been created called Entanglement based upon this book. And I'm using this as an example because what happened was so many people embraced the idea, and not everyone had to read the book to embrace the idea, that it is now accepted in the mainstream that there is a field that connects all things. Other books followed. Lynn McTaggart wrote the book called The Field, a dear friend of mine based in the UK. Other people wrote about the field, and science had to catch up, Marilyn, with what we already accepted as truth in our everyday lives. Science had to scramble to catch up to begin sharing this in the mainstream classrooms, and at least sharing the research and sharing the science. I'm not saying they're on board 100%, but mainstream science is on board with the fact that there is a field of energy and that it's been proven time and time again, most recently at the CERN research facility in Geneva, Switzerland, in the year 2012. They confirmed that the field exists to an even greater degree than had been expected in the past. So this is an example of where not everyone has read that book, but the idea in that book has touched so many people and caught on so quickly that the idea is pretty much universally accepted. And I think that principle applies to the other things that we're talking about as well. And I just want to say, when it comes to, in case we don't get to this, when it comes to the new book, Human by Design, I don't know if our listeners may know that I am a scientist. I'm a degreed geologist. And as a geologist, what I am saying about evolution, Darwin's idea of evolution, and us, flies 180 degrees in the face of what I was taught when I was in the universities. On the one hand, the other hand, the evidence no longer supports evolution as our story. But I want to be really clear. Evolution as a principle is a fact. And as a geologist, I've seen it in the fossil record for plants, for animals, for insects, and for primates. But here's the thing. Something happened 200,000 years ago. We don't know precisely what that something is, and that's where science is stuck. 200,000 years ago, modern humans appeared on Earth. We appeared suddenly. We appeared completely intact with all of the functions and capabilities that we have right now. As we're listening on this call, everything in your body, your ancestor 200,000 years ago had. We showed up 200,000 years ago, and we have not changed since that time. And we can say that factually because the DNA that is now capable of being extracted from the fossils of our ancestors, when they extracted the ancient DNA from what's called anatomically modern humans, and they compare that to our DNA today, it's the same. We haven't changed. We have the same brain capacity, the same physical characteristics. I think we have probably evolved in consciousness. I believe that's happened. But we showed up 200,000 years ago, and we don't know where we came from. So the principle of evolution breaks down only for humans. Something happened 200,000 years ago, and I think as we begin to embrace what that something is, it's going to lead us to a deep truth of who we are, where we come from, why we are here as we are, and it may, Marilyn, be the most unifying principle that brings together the seemingly separate ways of thinking. And in a very polarized world, I think it may be one of the most powerful, unifying discoveries as scientists allow themselves to follow the evidence rather than force themselves to stick to a story that's no longer true. So I just wanted to clarify that in case we don't get to it through some of the questions here.
And one of the things I really liked about the book is even though you were overturning the theory that has been believed for a good 150 years, I like the fact that you actually had a segment in the book where you were honoring Darwin and his work and what he did at the time and being a pioneer, which I thought was really lovely.
Oh, well, totally. You know, Charles Darwin, I have a lot of respect for Charles. Well, first, I just have to share this story with our listeners. I was doing a radio interview here in the United States, and for the most part, they're supportive, and every once in a while, you know, we get what's called a hostile interview, and this was one of those. And the interviewer, what the interviewer said to me right off the bat, he said, "Gregg, what gives you the right to question the biological theories put forth by Charles Darwin when you are only a geologist?" And I asked the interviewer back, I said, "My friend, do you know what the profession was of the man that created the theory of evolution? Do you know what Charles Darwin's degree was in?" And he said, "No." And I said, "He was a geologist." So it was a geologist that formed the theory. And Darwin could not possibly have known in his day, in 1859, well, the book was actually written in the 1820s, and it wasn't published until 1859. So he could not possibly have known in his day what we know today about DNA, about cells, and I think he did the best with what he had access to, but the key is Darwin himself stated, I have his manuals, his notes here in my office, copies of them. They're not the originals, but he himself acknowledged, he said, "My theory is only a first step." He said it's not the theory to end all theories. It is a first step in a journey to understand ourselves. And he said the moment the evidence no longer supports my theory must fall, and a new theory will take its place. So Darwin was okay with his theory falling, and he just wanted to move us off of the mark, get us unstuck from the ideas of that time. It's the modern academics and the people with an agenda, the corporate interests, the political interests, the academic interests, even the pharmaceutical interests that want us to believe this story that is no longer supported. So I do have a lot of respect for Darwin, and I think he has gotten a bad rap for reasons that aren't necessarily accurate. And I think I wanted just to say that from my perspective in the book. So thank you for the opportunity to say that here tonight as well.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And I think, you know, that I'm just looking at a couple of questions, and I guess you've sort of answered it, but I'm just going to put it in the way that Linda has phrased it as well, in case there's anything else you wanted to add to that. So one of the things she says is, how does Gregg deal with people who say that what he and others like him are saying is pseudoscience? How do you deal with that? Or is it you just have the faith that when it's time for it to land, it will have what I call the ripple effect? Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, thank you for the question and for the acknowledgement. And in all honesty, I think it's all about how the information is delivered. So I think it's possible to share new discoveries and do it from a place of kindness and objectivity rather than from the place of anger. And feeling, you know, that we need to have some kind of a revolution. So when I am with colleagues and I ask them the question, the way I'll approach it, are you aware of the new discoveries that tell us these things. And that's very different than confronting them and saying, your ideas are wrong. So I'll say, are you aware of these? And 9 times out of 10, they're not, because they are working in the university environments and in the corporate environments and the political environments. This is a political hot potato where they rely on sources of information that are more propaganda. So they're not even aware of the information. If someone does, when I'm on a radio interview, like I mentioned earlier, and the interviewer has a problem, the problem is with their own belief system, because what I'm simply sharing is peer-reviewed science. So it's not my channeled information, it's not my theory or my hypothesis. This is rock-solid science from scientists who simply do not have a platform like I do to share the information. They're relegated, and these are the real deal. I mean, they're working their way in laboratories, and they're out in the field, and they're finding these things. They're publishing, and they're publishing in obscure journals that are very specific to their science. You're not seeing this in the airport newsstands, or on the cable television documentaries. So it is, when the evidence no longer supports the story, it's time for a new story. And that's the bottom line, is the human story that has served us in the past is no longer serving us, and it's actually dividing us. And as we embrace the new discoveries, it gives us the pathway to healing some of the deepest hurts that divide us as families and communities and societies. And I think because there's an opening, we recognize that's happening. It's created an opening to embrace the new information. And rarely do I have someone actually attack me. If they don't like it, it's the information they have a problem with. Or maybe they just don't like me. There are some people that just don't like me. And I'll say that to them on the radio. I'll say, if you don't like me, that's one problem. But if you don't like what I'm saying, your problem is with the science. And 9 times out of 10, it's because they simply have not heard the science. So long answer to a short question, but I really believe it's in the delivery and how kindly can we introduce new ways of thinking while honoring the thinking of the past that's led us to where we are today. And how kindly can we share that information that allows us to work together to create the new human story. And for me, that is a part of the workshop as well, my personal workshop in life.
I love that, and I've had glimpses of that. When I was reading the book this week, I was kind of thinking about something I'd done many years ago now. It's probably about 13, 14 years ago, where I had to work, what you would call it the projects in the United States. We would call it council estates here, and we had some gang members, some residents, and the police who were all at war with each other, quite literally, and somebody had died as part of that process, and it was all messy. And I was brought in, I had 3.5 hours to run a workshop to bring these people together for the first time. And the police had even said, we're not coming, it's too volatile. And I was the one who was organizing it and running it. And my vision for that was that by the end of the workshop, they would all be together, eating together, breaking bread, as I called it in my mind. And one of the images that sticks with me to this day is one of the little old ladies who's 4'0", looking up at one of the gang members who's a good 6 foot and saying, I remember your mother on the estate, and you have grown up to be such a lovely young man. And they were sharing food. And I didn't have any fancy techniques. The thing that I had was holding the space and the intention. So when I was reading what you were writing about the monk, and we probably haven't got time to go into it here today, but that one word that he shared with you in answer to your very deep question, it reminded me of that. And so do you want to say what that word was, and if there's anything you want to add to that? Because I thought that was a beautiful kind of story in the book.
Well, what you're saying, I'm not going to add to the story specifically, but what is the interest of time. But what you're talking about, Marilyn, this goes, for many people, this is a philosophical conversation, that their belief is it's a philosophical conversation. The reality is that the deepest hurts that are shredding our families and tearing apart our communities and polarizing our societies and our nations, so it's up for everybody, those deepest hurts are based in the way we have been taught to think about life and about ourselves. And because we've been taught that life is an accident of biology and all the implications of that, we've been taught that life has very little value. And when you see the cyberbullying of young people and the suicides that result from that, and you see the hate crimes based upon sexual orientation, or the hate crimes based upon religion, or the hate crimes based upon the color of our skin, and you see the atrocities on the battlefield that are happening throughout the world. Right now, there are only 11 countries in the world who are not physically engaged, boots on the ground in conflict. Only 11 nations who are not at war. As different as all of the things are that I've just mentioned, the common denominator is it's only possible because of the way we've been taught to think. And as we embrace the new discoveries that reveal the deepest truths of our existence and the fact that we are the product of something other than a random mutation, and the fact that nature is actually based upon cooperation and not competition, as we've been led to believe. The economic system is based upon that idea, upon competition, the corporate system. All of these we now know are no longer true. So as we embrace these deep truths, they give us a place to begin as we globalize this planet and we merge as people and families and cultures and societies. If we can merge based upon these deep truths. And I had the opportunity to say this at the United Nations when I was there with Bruce Lipton recently. And these are the kinds of ideas that the people at the UN said, why don't we know about this? You know, this is new information to us. So if it's new to them, I imagine it's new to a lot of people. And I think this is the power of allowing ourselves to embrace these deep truths and the implications that ripple out into our lives. So I won't spend any more time on that because I know we want to get some other questions, but I just want our listeners to know this is more than a philosophical conversation. It goes right to the core of what you and I, we're in this together, what you and I have been taught about ourselves and our relationship to the world, and how that is changing as the world is changing before our very eyes. So, we could do a whole program just on this, and I'd love to do it.
Oh, me too. I remember my boss saying, Matt, he begged me not to go. He said, it's too dangerous. I don't want you to go. And I said to him, because he knew who I was, I said, don't worry, Andy, I visualized it in my mind. It's all going to be cool. But he just couldn't understand why I would go into that sort of situation on my own. But I just knew it was a human contact thing and looking in another human being's eyes as opposed to, and getting past those preconceived ideas. Now, so one of the things we're going to transition then into a slightly different direction with our next question. So she's asking, this is from Marie, and she says, can you please ask Gregg to give specific ways to activate our mirror neurons to receive biological permission to initiate self-healing?
Wow, I love her language. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So mirror neurons, for our listeners, may not be familiar with this. It's a new class of neurons, relatively new, discovered in the early 2000s, published in the year 2004. And the bottom line to mirror neurons is that they are a class of neurons that fire in our brain under two circumstances. One is when we actually have the experience, whatever that is, and there's no surprise there. But the second is a big surprise to scientists because the neurons fire when we witness someone else having an experience. So our brain, from that perspective, our brain doesn't know the difference between watching an experience and actually having the experience. Now, we inadvertently or unconsciously use the mirror neurons all the time. This is how we learn from our parents non-verbally as children. But what the research is showing and what ancient traditions have demonstrated is the mirror neurons can go far beyond simply helping us to learn, how to eat a bowl of cereal from our parents. Now, I want you all to think about this. If your brain doesn't know the difference between experiencing and witnessing, and you witness another person having a healing in their body, and your brain is witnessing that healing, and your brain doesn't know the difference between watching it and actually experiencing it, your brain will begin to wire and create the chemistry to mirror what it has seen. Now, the question is, how do we optimize that? It happens for everyone on a subtle level, and admittedly to a lesser degree, until we learn to hone these capabilities. That's part of what the book is about. And one of the ways to create greater receptivity in our bodies to what our mirror neurons are experiencing is through something that is called heart-brain coherence. So another discovery in 1991, the discovery was made, it was published in 1994, is that there are actually neurons in our heart as well as neurons in the brain. It's a class of neurons, they're called sensory neurites, and there are about 40,000 of these specialized cells in the human heart that think and they feel and they remember independently of the cranial brain. And what our ancestors told us and what modern science has revealed is that it's possible to harmonize the heart and the brain, the neurons in the heart and the neurons in the brain, two separate organs, but it's possible to harmonize these organs into a single potent neural system, into a single potent network. And when we create that harmony ripples throughout our body, and it sends our body very specific signals of balance and healing. And a part of that harmonization is that what we perceive through our mirror neurons has a greater potential in the place of this heart-brain harmony. So again, this is a long answer to a short question, but I wanted to honor anyone that's listening that may not have the benefit of having read the book or maybe knowing about some of these other principles. So we just covered a whole lot of ground. Neurons exist in the heart as they do in the brain. It's possible to tune, to harmonize the heart and the brain together to create this very powerful state of existence in the body. It's a very powerful state of biology. It's called heart-brain coherence. And in the presence of the balance of heart-brain coherence, what we take in through our senses has a greater opportunity to benefit us. And something we teach in the workshops, we go beyond everything that we're talking about now, but this is the principle that's at work. So that is the background. The answer to the question is, how do we optimize what's happening with our mirror neurons? The answer is to engage the mirror neurons in the presence of heart-brain harmony.
Wonderful. And I know in the book, because it was a book that my jaw was on the floor. I read the book, I think, in probably around November 2000, The Heart's Code, and it just blew my mind. And I distinctly remember the woman with the chicken nuggets. And that's the one you mentioned in the book, because I read that, and I just had goosebumps when I mentioned it now. But if people haven't read The Heart's Code, I would definitely recommend that. And before you came onto the call, Greg, we were talking about HeartMath, because I know you do a fair bit of work with the HeartMath Institute.
Yeah,
and we've got someone on the call, Linda, who's a HeartMath trainer, so we were having a chat about that as well this evening.
Oh, Linda, thank you for your work. And The Heart's Code, I believe, was written by Paul Purcell, was his name.
That's
and I endorsed that book back when it was. They asked me to read it and endorse it if I was drawn to, and I was. And it was the folks at HeartMath, I think, that actually facilitated the publishing of that book as well. So it was one of the first books that documented the potential of these neurons in the heart to actually preserve memories independently of the brain, and the memories remain in the heart regardless of whose body the heart resides in. So it was explaining why heart transplant patients often demonstrate after a successful transplant. The heart heals, but they begin to embrace new personalities, different kinds of food, their personality changes in sexual orientation, all of these things, and they were able to link those back to the qualities that were in the heart that is now in their body. So it really opened the door to a lot of possibilities and a lot of controversy as well.
Absolutely. I just want to share with you something that Melanie has said, just going back to when you talk about the Divine Matrix. She said, I just recently read the Divine Matrix, and it was brilliant. Everything resonated with me, and I had a total paradigm shift because of it.
Wow, thank you, Melanie. There is a media company called Gaia, G-A-I-A, used to be called Gaiam, G-A-I-A-M, that has just released an entire television season based upon the new book, The Divine Matrix. So if you're really drawn to that, and if you're not aware of it, if you go to Gaia, Gaia.com, see Gaia TV, and you can see they just released the first episode last Thursday. So it is still, even though the book was released in 2007, the ideas are very current, and new discoveries are now just substantiating the concept, and then they're taking it even further. And it's so beautiful to see this idea of the connectivity of all things that has been the foundation of indigenous principles for so long. It's so beautiful to see that coming into vogue in the mainstream. And somebody was talking to me when I was doing an interview. They said, Gregg, what does it feel like to have, to have this sudden success with your work? And I said, well, it might be sudden to you. I said, this actually, 2019 is the 34th year that I have done this work in one form or another. So I said, it might seem sudden to you, but for me, it's like it's about time. And other Dr. Bruce Lipton has said the same thing about his work in epigenetics in his book, The Biology of Belief. Dr. Joe Dispenza has said the same thing, about his work with neurons. And I think it just goes to show that, we do this work for a long time, so it's ready when the world is ready to receive that. And when it comes into vogue, if we waited until it was needed to try to start developing the work, it'd be too late. So the ideas have been out there for a long time, and we're simply bringing them into the modern idiom through modern language in a way that hopefully we can apply in our lives today, because the world's changing, and the changes that we're being asked to make, if we base those changes on the deepest truths of our existence and what we now know to be true about ourselves, I think that stacks the deck in our favor for success in terms of individuals and families, and ultimately as a planet, as we move into this new world that's emerging so quickly. So I think it's interesting to see how the ideas are emerging in the modern world. And I had a talk with my publisher, Marilyn, here in the U.S. a couple of weeks ago, and the publisher said, Gregg, you've been doing this for so long, and your colleagues. There's a whole new generation of people that are now becoming aware of this work for the first time. So it's like a lot of the work, it's getting a second life. So new people, young people, millennials and younger, they're just now becoming aware of this work, and so I think it is an opportunity to really embrace these concepts with a younger generation and incorporate it into their beliefs and their lifestyle as they think about themselves and solve their problems.
Well, I'm just thinking so I've only been doing this work for 18 years. This will be year number 19. So 18, 34, I've still got a bit, because now, every time I flick on the news or something, I'm like, I've been teaching that for 18 years. Oh, I've said that 20 years ago. Oh, yeah, I did that 25 years ago. And people often say, oh, Marilyn, the world is catching up with your ideas. And I just think, oh, my God, I feel like I'm doing it forever, but I can see with the 34-year marker, I've got a little bit of a way to go.
Well, then you know that where that's going to put me. When you're at 34 years, where does that put me? I look forward to doing our conference in London when you have had your 34 years, and I'll be your MC on the stage, and I'll be introducing you. And I'll do a good job.
Hold you to that.
Okay, all right. Hey, I love your country. I love your country. I love London. I love the UK. I love coming there. We've got so many friends there, and we do so much work there. You mentioned the Watkins Journal, and I just did another series of interviews with London Real, and I think some of your listeners are probably familiar with that. We have the conference on consciousness and human evolution that happens there every year. So the UK is really a hub, and it's really at the forefront of these new ideas and new ways of thinking, and people from around the world converge upon the UK so that they can have this information and then take it back into their homes, their families, their places of work, and their communities. And so I just want to thank everyone that's listening, and thank you, Marilyn, for having a beautiful home and a beautiful country for us to share the ideas that are creating a beautiful new world.
Oh, and it is. And for people who are listening who are in the UK, and because I know we've got people from Australia, America, the UK, I think somebody from Germany, and somebody from Eastern Europe, and just in terms of what I glanced at earlier on today. But the conference that Gregg was mentioning, particularly where you can see Bruce Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza and several other, amazing minds, is something called the TCCHE, the Conference for Consciousness and Human Evolution, and it happens normally in August. They had a change this year, but Gregg, are you speaking this year? I'm saying you are, and I'm assuming you are.
I am speaking this year, yes.
Brilliant. So Gregg will be speaking this year. I'm the host and the MC for the event, so I'm introducing the speakers and doing the Q&A and that sort of thing. So, check that out because it is an incredible event. And actually that reminds me, for those of you who pre-registered, what you're going to be, I'm going to pull a name out of the hat later on, and I'm going to give you a signed copy of Human by Design, but you're not going to get it until September because I'm going to have to buy another copy and get Gregg to sign it when we're working together at the TCCHE. So, Gregg, when I come at you with a couple of books, that'll be why. And I thought I'd do a prize for someone.
Yeah, my pleasure.
In closing, is there anything, because, oh my God, I mean, I've got probably 50 questions that sat here that I could be asking you, and we've got
Marilyn,
about 3 minutes.
I apologize for interrupting. I just want to ask you, this is a media day for me, and I've got a stack of interviews, and I've got another one coming in, but can you go a few minutes longer, and can we take a few more of those before the next interview comes in?
Oh my God, yes.
Are we? I didn't know if we're limited, on this service. So if we could
go...
No. If we
How
go
much longer can we go for?
15 or 20 minutes, and I've got an interview coming in at the top of the hour.
Oh, that would be absolutely amazing. I love you, Gregg.
And we'll do the light. I love you. I love you right back. And let's do the lightning round, okay? I'll be less verbose on my answers.
And actually, just out of that then, because one of the things I was going to ask you, did you want to, when we get to, let's say, the 10, 12-minute mark, I'm just going to ask you to think about it, because in the book you have got some gorgeous processes and exercises. So I don't know if you wanted maybe to close today's call with one of the processes, one of the sort of, I call them almost guided meditations. I don't know what you would call them. They're called exercises in the book, but maybe just have a think, and if there's something you wanted to close with, we could do that as well.
Okay, let's see how it goes as we get to that point then.
Fabulous. Right, so let's get into this then. So one of the questions, it seems like a very simple question in terms of who are we, who are you, but it's deep. I know it's deep. So from what you know as us and our evolution, who we are, Gregg, who are you and who are we?
Well, it's a very simple question, and it's also a very complex question, and it can be answered on multiple levels. As a species, I think the overwhelming evidence suggests that we are the product of a natural process that has undergone some kind of an intervention. So at some point, and scientists, this date is not controversial. Scientists know, and they agree, 200,000 years ago, modern humans appeared on Earth. That, no problem there. The question is, how did it happen and what led to our appearance? It was only in the last few years that the technology has evolved to a point where the DNA analysis, this is like the crime mystery show CSI on TV, where we can tell so much from the DNA. We can actually reverse engineer the DNA. So what that means is we look at where it is today and we work backwards to see what had to happen to make us who we are today. And in doing that, scientists have discovered DNA fusions that cannot happen under natural circumstances. They have discovered modifications that we would essentially call splicing that have only been possible within the last few years with a new technology that is called CRISPR, C-R-I-S-P-E-R. Some of you may be familiar with it. Very controversial. It allows a scientist, a biologist, or a doctor to bring the DNA up on a computer screen like a MS Word document and cut and paste genes the way you would cut and paste words on a sentence and actually customize the DNA. We now have that technology, and now the question is the morality. Because we can, should we be doing this? But what the research is showing is something like that has happened to us in the past. And it happened about 200,000 years ago. And the fact that so many changes happened so suddenly, all at the same time. So that the fusion in chromosome 2 that gives us the ability for empathy and sympathy and compassion and self-regulation that allows a brain 50% larger than any other form of life. The mutation in chromosome 7 that gives us the ability to sing and create complex speech in a way that no other form of life can. They all happen exactly at the same time. So what that evidence strongly suggests is some kind of intelligent intervention. And as a scientist, that's the way I would answer the question. So who are we? We're the result of an intelligent intervention. And this has led scientists to what is called forbidden territory, because if it is an intervention, it suggests intent. And if it is intentional, it implies that there is a purpose. Why are we given these extraordinary potentials? And so that's where science is today. I have my personal feelings on why, but as a scientist, I can simply say it's not the result of a natural evolutionary process. And I believe, Marilyn, that some scientists believe that we've got to answer those questions before we know who we are. My belief is that as we awaken the extraordinary potentials, that those potentials will lead us to the answers to the questions. As we fully awaken what it means to be human and the potentials that we have to self-regulate longevity, intuition, the immune system, to self-regulate over 1,300 biological responses in the human body. We find that we're not victims in this world, but we are masters, maybe masters in training. And as we follow the evidence that these extraordinary potentials give us, I think they will lead to the answers. And that's the way I would answer that. Who are we? I would say that we're the result of an intentional intervention, given the gift of extraordinary potential, and we are awakening to that potential within ourselves. And I think the key to that awakening is the power of love, because we're finding that the power of love in the heart, in the brain, is one of the keys to awakening these potentials. Again, long answer to a short question.
Oh, and what a beautiful answer it is. And I guess that leaves me, as we're talking about chromosomes, there is something called the telomeres. And one of the questions is, how do we lengthen those? Because from what you have written and what I heard you speak about last year at the TCCHE, the maintaining of those is also one of the keys to longevity. So can you just say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I'm just going to preface, the telomeres are one key to longevity, but they are not the only key. Common sense changes in lifestyle, nutrition, hydration, movement, all are factors. And they all affect the telomeres. So the telomeres are specialized portions of DNA that exist on the end of each chromosome in our body to protect the information when the cells divide. And there are a number of factors that we know lifestyle changes that we can make consciously that will strengthen these telomeres. So in the year 2009, the Nobel Prize in Science and Medicine was awarded to Elizabeth Blackburn and her colleagues for the discovery of an enzyme that exists in every one of our cells, and the enzyme is found in relation to the telomeres. It's called telomerase. And the purpose of this enzyme, it accomplishes three things. Number one, the enzyme stops the damage that is occurring through everyday life to our telomeres. So it's called oxidative stress. I don't want to go into all that in the interest of time, but it stops the damage. The telomerase stops the damage to the telomeres, number one. Number two, it heals the damage and repairs the damage that has already occurred. And number three, it actually begins to rebuild and lengthen the telomeres. So one of the keys is if we can activate this enzyme, telomerase, in our bodies. And in the book I talked, there are a number of ways to do this. Stress is one of the factors that degrades the telomeres. So if we can alleviate stress, and there are different kinds of stress. There's the emotional stress that we're aware of from families and relationships and driving in heavy traffic and pressures at work. We're aware of those. But there are kinds of stresses that we're not always aware of. So for example, when we drink water that has toxins, our body is struggling to rebalance that water. That is a stress to the body, but we may not be consciously aware of it. When we eat food that has been prepared in toxic ways, some oils break down under heat in toxic ways. Preservatives that are used in some of the food, fried foods, those kinds of things. Our body is constantly working to find a balance to what we are bringing in as nutrition. So that's another kind of stress. Exercise is a whole new meaning now. The ideas of exercise that were popular, in the 90s and the 2000s now have changed. And what we know is that the human body does better under short bursts of high-intensity exercise with brief recovery periods. It's called HIIT, high-intensity interval training. So short bursts, 30-second bursts, for example, of high-intensity training. It could be weightlifting. It could be some kind of movement with a 15 to 30-second rest. Actually relieves the stress in the body and the adrenaline levels, whereas a constant aerobic drain for 30 minutes or an hour sometimes has effects that are unwanted. A whole conversation we could have about that. Nutrition, even if we had the perfect diet, soils are so depleted right now that our food does not contain all the nutrition that we need. So supplements, the right kinds of supplements are good. And I actually list the supplements in the book, Human by Design. So all of these are factors. Perhaps the strongest, the most powerful factor is the emotional factor. And the harmonizing of the heart and the brain that I mentioned earlier is a key factor, scientifically documented, if you do this for 3 minutes, harmonize the heart and the brain, 3 minutes once a day, and it relieves that stress that sometimes we're not even aware of, both emotional and physical stress. So this is the key. If we can find the ways to relieve that stress, that is the key to lengthening those telomeres.
Absolutely wonderful, wonderful. And I've just seen a quick question come up. So this will probably be our last question. This is from Louise. And Louise said, I've heard 2020 is going to be the new golden age. What are your views? And she says, P.S., I've read most of your books and love your work with Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza. So the question is, what are your views about 2020 being the new golden age?
Well, Louise, thank you, first of all, for your love, your support, and your comments. And thank you for all that you're doing. And I want to thank everybody in our listening audience for everything you're doing to become the best person that you can be and just create the best world possible. And as far as 2020, I am less drawn to look at a particular date as being significant. I think it's less about the dates, Marilyn, in all honesty, and more about the significance that we give to the date. 2012 is a perfect example of that. The year 2000 was a perfect example of that. If collectively we want to give 2020 significance as the beginning of something new, and that's where we focus our energy, I think it's great. But inherently, I don't think there's anything magical about the year 2020. I know in my circles, the event producers that I work with all over the world are viewing 2020 as kind of a launch pad for new ideas and new ways of thinking. And there are huge global events that are being formed right now and planned for the year 2020. It sounds to us like it's a long ways off. It's right around the corner. So I think collectively, if we choose to give 2020 that significance, I think it's awesome. And if we say this is the beginning of a new way of embracing the way we choose to think about ourselves, new ideas, and we're going to build a new world from this point forward, we have to start somewhere. So I think it's awesome. It could have been 2019, or it could be, 2021. But I think the important thing is that we come together as a global family and that we are willing to embrace sustainable ways of thinking and living without judging our past. This is the key. So many people want to judge our past and say we made all these mistakes and that we've done so many things wrong. And whether we agree with the past or not, it has worked well enough to get us where we are. We're here. So we have to say it has worked to some degree. And that the past is what it is because we did the best we could collectively with what we understood at the time. And now, in this information age where we have so much information at the touch of our fingers, we've outgrown the old ways of thinking. So rather than say that they're wrong and beat ourselves up and judge ourselves as failing, I think if we can simply say that we've matured and outgrown those ways of thinking, and that we are evolving and maturing into new ways of thinking. In my opinion, in my experience, that's a really healthy way to move forward without the guilt and the anger and the blame and the hurt. And if 2020 is a place where we choose to draw that line in the proverbial sand and where we move forward from, I'm all for it, and I'm actually involved in doing some very, very powerful programs in the year 2020 and beyond. We're actually booking into 2021 right now. So that's how optimistic we are. We as scientists and educators and thinkers, and I am very optimistic about the world that's emerging because we now know what doesn't work, and we now know what's possible. And the question, I think, and I talk about this sometimes. There was an author in the 20th century. His name was Khalil Gibran. And his pivotal book was called The Prophet. It was a series of poems, essays about life. And I was given a copy of that book when I was 10 years old by my mother when our family broke apart. And my mom said, I think this book might help you. And there was one passage in that book that sticks with me to this very moment in my life, right now. And the passage, Khalil Gibran said, work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. And that's been a cornerstone in my life for the difficulties and the jobs that I've had. And when we talk about the change that you and I are talking about right now, it takes work to change the way we think. And if we can think of that work as our love made visible, then the question we're asking is, do we love ourselves enough to put the energy into embracing a new way of thinking that is going to lead us into a healthy, sustainable world? And the answer to that is going to be the world that we leave as a legacy for our children. So do we love ourselves enough? Work is our love made visible. And I think that's where I'm going to have to leave this today, just in the interest of time, Marilyn.
Oh, that is, and what a beautiful, beautiful way to finish. And I think for me, one of the reasons I love personal development is because right up until the age of 32, I was angry, quiet, shy, suicidal, very withdrawn, couldn't speak to people, and that's not who I am. And so I ultimately know that it is possible if you choose to put the work in, to create a different life, not just for yourself, but for the ripple that creates. So I think what you've said there just sums up my whole experience of the field of work that I have chosen to be in and why I do what I do. So thank you for that, Gregg. That is just wonderful.
Well, Marilyn, you're very welcome, and I want to thank you for. I'm learning more about you in this conversation that we haven't talked about over our dinners at the conference, and I want to thank you for the work you've done and for sharing that part of your life with us. And I don't know about you, this seemed like it went by really quickly. So if we want to call this program number 1 and follow up with another one that we can maybe answer more questions, if you have space in your schedule, I'd love to do that.
Gregg, I'm totally going to be messaging Laurie tonight or tomorrow going, get me in. And Gregg, what I'd love to say, and this I'll write to Laurie about it, I would love to do a piece specifically around the healing of conflict, because that's been a big part of my, management consultancy work and working with gangs and, even corporate conflicts. So I'd love to do something around that, and maybe even we go through and almost take the book in chunks and do some pieces around that. So absolutely, I will definitely put that in the diary. If you can make the time, that would be amazing. And I really want to say thank you to everyone who has joined us. And Gregg, thank you for making the space in your time and your schedule.
Oh, you're so very welcome, and you now have put me in a really beautiful space for the next interview that I'm about to do. So thank you, Marilyn. I look forward to our next. I
really look forward to it. Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to those who weren't here live but are listening to this as a recording. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are residing in the world.